Hello, everyone. Hello there, and welcome to the Alliance of Independent Authors Self-Publishing Advice podcast. And it is that week of the month where we look at self-publishing poetry. And I'm here with Ms. Poetry herself, Trish Hopkinson. Hi, Trish.
Hi, Orna. Happy to be back.
It's great to have you here again. And while we have you, we are running a special today, a special member question and answer session for poets. So we regularly do a member Q&A at ALLi. I know you have your Ask Me Anything on your poetry website. But we don't at ALLi often focus in questions-wise specifically around poetry. So poets, this is your chance. If you're thinking of publishing a poetry chapbook or book, collection of any kind, if you have any ideas about that, if you even think it's something you might like to do sometime, this is your chance to ask questions. So if you are present on the call, do hop into the chat and let us know that you're here and where you're zooming in from. And if you have questions there, if you want to leave them in the chat box, we will try to get to those. We did put out a call, however, and we have some questions already lined up, so we'll do those first, but if we have time we'll certainly get to your live questions as well. So yeah, I think we'll start with this one, which is, does anybody buy poetry anyway? Some person, one of our members who's feeling, has published, has put together I think a couple of chapbooks and a collection, and it isn't selling, and she's kind of asking the question, does poetry sell? So what do you think?
Well, I think it certainly has reemerged. It's definitely a really great time for poetry. I know that, Amanda Gorman's books have sold out and they're doing, millions of other copies, reprints. And I think that's going to help elevate poetry in general. We love to see any poet be successful. Certainly having a poet at the Super Bowl was awesome, at the inauguration, other things to help elevate poetry. But yes, I mean, poetry, just like any other business or any kind of book sales, it takes some effort to market, and often poetry publishers don't have the budgets that other publishers might have for fiction or nonfiction. So it does, a lot more of that pressure is on the poet themselves to self-market and be able to, get the word out. And prior to the pandemic, one of the best ways to do that was really to go do readings, right? And have the opportunity to sell and sign books through reading tours, whether they were just local or within your geographic area, or if they were expanded, depending on if you did. Some publishers do have some budgets for poetry tours. But when you're self-publishing, even more of the onus is on you, right? To potentially make sure that you get the word out there to folks. So yes, I mean, it does sell. It does sell. Does it sell like some of the other, mainstream fiction authors? Not likely. Certainly there are some poets who do really well for themselves in the mainstream market. But we do have to work a little bit harder, and we do support each other a lot. But it isn't just poets who read poetry. I think that certainly is kind of a myth. While, a lot of the poets do enjoy reading poetry and do purchase poetry books, there is certainly a market out there of non-poets, other literary folks who just love poetry, who do want to purchase it. And it's a matter of really getting the word out there. So it can be challenging, especially during the pandemic.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that about, that myth that's there that only poets read poetry. It's so not true. And I have had, my eyes opened really around poetry since getting involved with self-publishing, because it does change things a bit, in the sense that I think self-publishing poets have been much faster to get on board digital publishing and the possibilities of marketing online. as opposed to live. So it is more than possible. And we are seeing some self-published poets who are, selling not just in their hundreds of thousands, but, shifting millions of copies, which is absolutely a new phenomenon. And it's new only for one reason, not that there are more people reading poetry necessarily than there were before, though there might be, I think.
I'm pretty sure there are at this point,
Yeah.
post-pandemic, post the administration changes in the US, some other things. Certainly we've had a resurgence maybe of people turning to poetry.
Yeah, and Catherine actually has just left a comment to say she also is saying that poetry is having a renaissance right now. And I think hard times, poetry always surges, and
It
that
does.
is. But what really makes a difference, I think, with digital publishing is that you go from having your local territory, an indie poetry publisher working in their own country, even if that country is the United States and has got millions of people, and trying to reach poetry readers in traditional ways. Poetry, as you say, was much more alive, intimate, room-based experience, and it's hard to scale. You cannot scale that. But when you kind of have the whole world and all the people who like to read poetry are now become your potential audience, you're not reaching all of them, of course, but the potential is there. Then if you know what you're doing, you can actually step by step build your audience, and we're definitely seeing that happening. And the other thing you said that I was so interested in was if you're published by an indie press, or even one of the big poetry publishers, you are still going to have to do the lion's share of reaching the readers kind of marketing. So they will do, maybe if you're lucky and there's some budget there, they may do a traditional media campaign for you, or a local reading, or a launch, or some kind of connection with bookstores or something. They may do something like that for you. But the day-to-day, establishing your poetry platform, letting people know what you're about, your website, all of that, and your social media accounts, they will all be in your doing. And really, that's the hardest bit. So if you can do all that yourself, it does kind of beg the question as to why you would then give all your rights away and get less than 10% of the actual income from your book, when you could publish it yourself and get, if you sell on your own website, almost 95% or more, or through the self-publishing platforms up to 70%. So, these are real questions that poets are now considering. I think for the first time, the pandemic has helped us to kind of more poetry readers online, more poets publishing online. So short answer, that was all. Two long answers from Trish and me to your question, but short answer from both of us, I think, is a big yes. So
yes, absolutely.
Great. So I've kind of touched off my take on the next question, which is, am I better to get a publisher or to publish the work myself? I'll just add to what I just said there a moment ago to say that it doesn't need to be either or. It can be both, and we are seeing lots of people doing both. But in you're somebody who has huge experience of the literary journals and what I would call the traditional poetry market. What do you think? Is somebody better off to do it one way or the other?
I think it really depends on your personal goals. I mean, certainly, one aspect of publishing with a traditional poetry press or independent press, which a lot of them are, right? Or with a university press, is you may have additional connections or ways that book might be taught in a poetry class, which is one way to really elevate book sales. So you may have a better connection there with, say, academia, if you're publishing with a traditional press, and that is one way that you can, get more book sales. But then again, it sort of just depends on, do you know some of those professors, or are those professors really following specific presses? And getting the word out there is still going to help you potentially do that. But making sure your book is readily available through, major markets online is, safe bet. So if you are going to self-publish, make sure you have an ISBN, make sure that you have good places to potentially sell it so it's easy for students to find. And then, being connected with academia, knowing some professors is not a bad way to go to get the word out there, to see if they're interested in teaching your poems in one of their classes. And Some poets go to the extent of actually creating lessons to go along with their books that they hand out to professors, hoping that they'll have, a few hundred students be required to purchase their book. So that is one way to go, and it may be a little easier to go that path if you are traditionally published than it would be if you're self-published. But if you have, a nice CV with a lot of good references and people are knowing your poetry and you have that reputation, then I don't think a professor would say, oh, you self-published, so I'm not interested in teaching your poetry. I don't think most professors would care one way or the other. It's more about the work and what their students will gain from studying it. So that's one way of, potentially getting your work out there. I think both work. I think it is a little harder to self-publish and get the word out there. Certainly you can lean a little on the press. You will have some additional connections that you're not making all on your own. So it just depends on your platform and how much you're willing to push yourself and do that work. If you're an introvert, you probably want to press.
Yeah, except that you'll still have to do the marketing yourself, So in that sense, you're getting some support, but I don't think it gets over that necessarily. I mean, I think social media is fantastic for introverts in the sense that you can control what you put out there. It doesn't have to be, say, what we're doing here, which would be an introvert's nightmare. You can do it in so many different ways, and
Sure.
And that, I guess, if you're not going to go the traditional route, I think it has to be social media, has to come in at some level. The Instagram poetry thing, as we've discussed before, is a major phenomenon, and all of the social media platforms have their poetry corner where there is lots of activity with poetry readers and writers. So that would be probably the way that you would go, or something. You have to find, and whichever way, as Trish said, it's very much about your personal goals. But one way or the other, you want people to read it or hear it and to consume it and to hopefully value it enough to, give you some money for it. It's not generally very expensive to buy a poetry book when you think of the amount of time, love, labor, and everything else that goes into it. So you want that as an outcome. And very often I think it's as much about that as setting that goal for yourself, rather than assuming you have to just give it away because, our first questioner's question, does anybody even buy it anyway? Yes, they do. And, whether you get paid or not paid, actually the first step in that is very much down to you. If you set it as your creative intention that you want to be paid for your poetry and you want to reach lots of readers, then you've got a much better chance of that happening than if you're going in with an either conscious or unconscious belief that it can't happen for you or it doesn't happen for poetry in general.
And there are other opportunities that I would just add that, I typically make more money doing things like interviews or paid guest blog posts or, solicitations to write poems for specific events, things like that. You'll get higher rates being paid for those types of things than you will probably on royalties, or even if you self-publish your actual books. If you think about, even let's say you take a pretty good run and you sell, 1,000 copies. You're only going to make so much off of that book before then, you might have some sales later, or unless you're really continuously doing readings and other things, it will slow way down, right? And you might get paid a lot more for some of the other things that I mentioned, which those are spin-off effects of having a published book, right? And proving yourself that reputation as an expert about at least your poetry and maybe poetry in general. So it's looking for all those opportunities and using your platform for all of them, including selling your books, but also the other stuff that can potentially really pay you more of like a true hourly, like wage.
That's a terrific point. And actually, I think we should make that our theme of next month, that we would look at
Okay.
all those spin-off opportunities, because I think that's a really good point. And we have a blog post actually, which is business models for indie authors.
Mm.
And in there are various ways in which you can, and loads of our members do, and particularly those who write in the more literary genre, where, you know, there aren't lots and lots of readers and just waiting for the next book, like say in a romance genre or a thriller genre, you know, where the audience is less, is kind of spoiled for choice. Let's be frank, there's so many amazing
Sure.
poets and amazing literary fiction writers going around, and not as many people who read those kinds of works. And again, I'm, you know, emphasizing what I said at the beginning, with a global audience, you definitely can reach readers, but it's not like they're lying around just waiting for it to happen. So lots of our members do use these various other ways of supplementing income. So it'd be really interesting to apply that to poetry, which is not something we've done to date. So let's do that next
Yeah,
time.
that sounds great.
Great. And the other thing I would say about this particular question before we get on to the next question is that a lot of this also depends on how many books you have. So
Yes.
self-publishing is definitely a major learning curve. And if you feel, you know, you're going to do a collection every 10 years or something, you know, you write slowly and you're quite happy to do that, and it's on the side of other activities, and, you know, you're not really what we might call a full-time poet, then it may well suit you better to have the support of a press. To do well self-publishing any work, you really only begin to see a good return from your investment of time, energy, love, labor, all of that, when you get to about book 3, because then it becomes easy. And then you've kind of established who your market is, because poetry is not one genre. It's actually an umbrella genre for lots and lots of other genres. So you could write, you know, dark poetry that that you're not going, you can write dark poetry, and then your readers are absolutely not going to be interested in somebody who writes inspirational poetry. So it's not
Right.
just about poetry as poetry. It's not. You've got to find out, you know, what the kind of poems that you write, who is the reader. And often that's more difficult for poets than it is for fiction writers or non-fiction writers, because the very nature of poetry is that you can write about all sorts of things, and in quite diverse ways and in lots of different formats. But there will be a theme and an underlying kind of sentiment that will put you into a particular genre. And also where you're from, very often poetry is categorized by, you know, American poetry, Irish poetry in my case, American poetry in Trish's. So, you know, there's all that going on as well. So if you're not going to do if you don't feel like you have a good few books in you, and to have a good few books in you, I think you need to be on social media or some other kind of publication deadline and process and schedule that's going to draw the poetry out of you, so that you have enough because you'll write a lot more poems than you'll actually put into a book.
Right.
So you need to become quite prolific, in other words, to be a successful self-published poet, and probably a successful trade published poet too. I can't think of any poet actually who just wrote one book.
That's true. That's true. But sometimes, you know, they can be spaced a couple of years apart, but they often, you know, as we mentioned, they have other gigs going, right? They're speaking, they're, you know, visiting universities, they're going to conferences, or they have interviews, all the things that we can talk about next time.
Exactly. Great. So the next question then is an easy one. What is it? We've mentioned them a couple of times already today and the last time. What is a chapbook?
Sure. Yeah. A chapbook. I mean, I often just tell people it's like a chapter of something more full length. So it's just a smaller size collection, typically poetry chapbooks. And then there are prose chapbooks as well that might include, you know, flash fiction or flash nonfiction or just very short stories. But chapbooks typically are 10 to 40 pages. If it's 10 or less, those are typically considered micro chapbooks. And then full-length poetry books or prose collections usually start around 50 pages. So there's, a little bit of a buffer there. My first traditionally published chapbook was like 45 pages or something, like just under a full length. But essentially, different presses have different lengths that they prefer. The most common length is usually an average of around 25, 26 pages for a chapbook.
Great. And from the self-publishing side, the minimum size book you can do through the print-on-demand publishers is 25 pages. So they won't take any less. So there you are. That's where you'll start. And just to say, because it might be useful for other people in terms of a process, how I kind of do it is I put most of the poems I write, I put on Instagram. So, and I'm quite easy about them. I just kind of let them come and put them out every second day or so. I put up something, and it's more for me about keeping that flow going, knowing that I get better stuff that way. The more poems I write, I get a better one. And some of these I put into chapbooks, and they are 10 poems long. So when I have 10 poems, I just do another chapbook. And I don't really, while they're all available and, to be purchased, and sometimes are, I don't sell as much of those as then I do selections and collections from those on particular themes. And that works really well for me because there's a kind of a filtering process whereby, by the time I get to a collection, I'm putting things together. I've dropped a lot of things that I've written along the way, but I've had the satisfaction of publishing them. And then I also do one exclusive poem a month for my patrons on Patreon. And that is exclusive to them for a while, and then that will also often go into a book once it's that exclusivity period has passed. So that's one way you can kind of manage it as a self-publishing poet. And I think the thing to do is to find some kind of rhythm that suits you. So the whole Instagram thing was really great for me because it made me write more. It made me get involved more with other people in my particular genre of poetry, which kind of tends towards the inspirational, spiritual kind of stuff. And it really has been, I write far more often than I did before I did it. But that might not work for you at all. It's a very individual thing, and you have to kind of try in a spirit of exploration and experiment, try a few things and see what works over time. Yes, so this is not a short-term, quick fix thing. It's something that you integrate into your life, into your writing life, and into your life in general.
Yep, absolutely. And I do something similar, even though I choose to share my work after it's been published in a lit mag or journal, because it's a little bit different than self-publishing. They often want to be the first one to publish your work in those cases. And so, but it's similar for me. It's not as, my rotation isn't as quick as yours, but I make sure that I'm sending work out so that I do have something to promote on my website from time to time. And, sometimes those come in little spurts. So I may have 2 or 3 publications within a couple of weeks, and then I just promote those, spread those out, because I want to make sure as I'm sharing things on my website, my platform, it's not just all about me promoting me, but rather it's the things I'm giving back to the community as well, and sort of alternating between those so that my readers get excited when they see me promote my own work, and in the interim, they're getting other helpful things by reading my website. So, which I know, you do a lot of that too through all of the alliance work in your own, like you said, your Instagram and other things where you have certain cadence for certain things, but there's always something for your followers depending on, what information they're looking for. They have the opportunity to get that. So I believe that having a steady schedule is so important on whatever the platform is, whether you mentioned Patreon, but certainly a lot of that can also be through your social media and other self-promotion. And I think one of our questions was, can you make money from Patreon, right? And there certainly are, a lot of self-published poets that do things similar to what you described. And then through the pandemic, I've seen, a lot of Venmo and PayPal tipping when you're doing a reading or an event, or if you're teaching a workshop, those types of things where you can get, either some additional Patreon followers or, some tips through Venmo or PayPal or other platform that you're using. And that is a great way to add to that supplemental income that we were talking about before. So lots of other opportunities.
Fantastic. And so I think, what we've both been talking about here has covered the other two questions, which was how can I get more readers for my poetry, for my chapbooks, for my poetry books. We've certainly covered some ideas in this session, and we'll do more next time. So stay tuned for that, which will be this time next month, and we'll cover that. Just before we leave this part, in a few moments, we'll be reading out our indie poetry please winners for this month, and Trish is going to read one of her poems as well. So that's a different segment of the show to the advice, but we do have a couple of questions in, so let's just have a look and see if we can help with these. I'll go backwards up kind of thing. So Paul Amory, writing a first collection, Northern Soul, Songs of Loss and Redemption. Do you have a daily routine? And how did you? So two different questions. First of all, do you have a daily routine, Trish?
Sort of. I don't really, because I am toggling so many different things. So between, my day job and just other personal responsibilities and other poetry activities that I do outside of my own website and my own publications, there are often quite a few things on my to-do list. And really, I just prioritize those the best that I can. I do spend time every day, either promoting through social media or by posting on my website. I used to post very religiously daily on my website. Now It's more like 4 to 5 posts a week. Sometimes there are days when I just can't fit one in, but I'm always doing at least some social media promotion every day. It's very rare that I skip over that. So for me, it's looking at everything that I have to do, prioritizing that, and sometimes I'm able to spend more time on my website. Sometimes I'm spending time, like with Orna today. So this hour will take up some of that time that maybe I would have spent elsewhere, but I just work through that. And that's one thing that's nice about controlling your own business, right? If you are self-publishing, then you can control all those aspects. And you can set those rules and timelines for yourself that work for you. And the important thing is really to be consistent. So whether that's daily or weekly or how frequent it is, just make sure you're consistent so your followers know when to expect to see something new from you.
Great. And I'm similar to Trish. I don't, one of the reasons I'm in writing and publishing is, and indie, is because I'm not great with strict routine. But what I do plan, and I do have one thing that is routine, and that is my first thing to do every single day is write. So, and that's because I always have a mountain of a to-do list. And if I don't do it first, the calls of everybody else kind of take over, and it just doesn't happen. And I know that from experience. So you're on your first book, Paul. I think a lot of what's happening for you now is just getting used to putting that out there and finding out yourself, trying out this routine, trying out that routine. It took me quite a few years before I settled into, I now have a very good routine whereby when I'm on and I'm working very productively, and when I'm off, I'm completely off. But for a number of years, I was kind of a bit all over the place. I never knew when I was on and when I was off. So it takes a bit of time, I think, to settle into being a self-publisher. And first book is hard because you're learning so much about how to do 7 different processes. There are 7 different processes in good publishing. So it's a big learning curve. So it's impossible to have a routine and be on a steep learning curve at the same time. you've got to kind of go through the learning. It's on the second book that you'll begin to settle more into a routine. But I mean, you should be trying now and looking at yourself and observing what works for you, but probably will be book 2 before things begin to settle down. So if you're feeling like there's a lot to be done at the moment, that's completely normal. And then you also ask another very good question, which is, how did you learn to deal with criticism in your early days, Trish? Can you remember?
Well, I kind of have an edge there because I was a non-traditional student, and I really started writing seriously by taking creative writing classes as part of my English degree, which I didn't really start attending live classes until after, well, it was probably after 2010, and I graduated 2013. So I was almost 40, and had a successful career. So I was pretty open to criticism, and don't get my feelings hurt very easily. So
she was a tough old boot by then.
Yeah, I totally was. And very, very open to learn and seeing any criticism as being helpful, even if it came negative from a person, just determining whether there was anything in that for me to learn or not. And for the most part, I've been very fortunate and haven't had a lot of experience with just mean criticism. But I think in general, it's really, really important for everyone to remember that you're the artist. This is your art. So while if people ask you questions, or they're confused about something, or they say, well, I just didn't like that, you get to decide if that changes your art. And if that's a single opinion, or even if it's a lot of opinions, if it's not helping you accomplish what you want to accomplish within your art, your writing, then it's completely up to you. I mean, and very fair for you to ignore all of that feedback. I would, though, say feedback is super helpful. It does challenge you. It does make you a better writer. So if you can, learn to take it, figure out how to reconcile that feedback, and recognize that the bottom line is it's your creation and you get to choose and decide, then it can definitely help make you a better writer.
Without a doubt. I don't think I have anything to add to that, except to say I have had mean. I've had mean. I had a guy who followed me around being very mean for a long time, and very publicly. So, and I will say that the tougher the criticism, the more potential learning there is therein for you. If not artistically, and sometimes, yes, as Trish says, it's an opportunity to learn. Sometimes, as she also says, it's something to ignore, but there may be emotional learning in it for you. There may be that kind of toughening up process, particularly if you are young or a young artist. So we could be, you can be 99 and a half and be a young artist if it's your first work and you're putting it out there and you're quite sensitive about it. So the only way to get a bit tougher is actually to ride the wave and realize that anybody who is criticizing, it's 99% about them and maybe 1% about you. And it might even be like my mean guy was 100% about him, I think. I decided it was anyway. So it's very much about where they're coming from, what kind of poetry they like, what they're looking for on that day. I just read one of those in Weekend Supplement. A woman was paid to write this review, where she spent the whole review writing about this amazing novel and criticizing it because it wasn't as far as she was concerned, the novelist had written too many books like this before and she wanted something different. And so she just slated this book, which was all about her. So you will have to, if you're going to put yourself out there, you will have to kind of accept that getting stuff back is part of the deal, and you will. We all do.
And you can use some very simple self-talk or ways to respond to those things. So I would suggest a couple of things that I think have been valuable to me. If you're not sure how to respond, or maybe you do feel a little bit of a tinge, like you felt like somebody's, coming at you, or emotionally you're upset, you can certainly just say, thank you, I'll take that into consideration. That's all you have to say. Whether you change your work is none of their business. And the other thing that I would say is, if somebody really is being mean and attacking you personally, that you can always say, I don't deserve that. And those two responses can give you quite a bit of power internally, and also give you something to say that takes the emotion out of it, to just say, I will take that under consideration. Or if they're real meanies, tell them you don't deserve it. Make them respond to that.
Wish I'd had you around when my guy was there. That's all fantastic advice. So thank you, Trish, so much for that. Thank you, everybody, for the fantastic questions, which have helped lots of other poets who are listening or watching this. We are now going into a completely different part of the show, which won't be on our advice podcast. It will appear on the Indie Author Please on Instagram, TV, and on SoundCloud. So this is where we actually read out the short list of our Indie Poetry Please submissions over the past month, and Trish is going to read one of her poems as well, and then we'll announce the winner. So yes, let me get out our first people and see what we got.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Now, where did I put it? Oh yes, my phone. I'm going to have to just go and get it. Hold on 1 second.
Quick coffee break.
Sorry about that, folks. Rather foolishly put it on charge and then forgot to take it in to the sound room. So here we are. So the first poem I will read is by Samantha Reynolds, and you will find her on Instagram at Bent Lily is her handle on Instagram, at BENTLILY, as in the flower, Bent Lily. And Samantha is an inspirational poet, and she does every day. She does an uplifting poem or piece of writing. So this one was called The Myth of Finding Balance. Balance is found not in a day, but in a life. So stay up late for weeks if your soul is lit up with ideas, and then rest when you need to, long and deep like a bear. Happiness is not an emotion as much as a rhythm. Keep tuning in. My dream is that we can all be like the sea. Nobody rushing us when we're calm, and nobody telling us to slow down when we're inspired, to rise up and pound another frothy wave of words on the shore. So yeah, I thought that was a nice one for the poets among you. And now it's something very different comes Trish.
Oh, yes. No, that was a great, my poem also has a water in it.
Oh,
so
fab.
That was a great connection. I really loved that last line.
Yes, it's all builds to that last line. I also liked the bear, I have to say.
Yes.
Yes, the long and deep like a bear, yeah. Okay.
Definitely. Lovely. So this poem was published in Writers Resist, and it is entitled, I Do Not Wait, for Walt Whitman. I do not wait, nor am I dismissed. I set myself apart, do not tremble beneath terms, cold, manly, butch, ball breaker, bitch. Do not determine my worth by whom I am kept. I ratchet skyward, take my place at the sun's table, lifted by turquoise bone and bladed wings. My scarab shell snubs boot heels, scurries and flutters solo, and yes, I possess myself. I will not be held in a fist, pinned or stuffed in a case, pierced beneath glass. I seat you in a room, waiting nude, simple and flaccid, unable to siphon one more drop of sap. My body is not yours to be damned. Instead, it releases grace in white waves and demands nothing of anyone but myself. I penetrate no one. I illuminate the paths of the unwaiting.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Again, all building towards those fabulous last words. Thank you. Our next poem is from Samuel Crosby. Yeah, we don't get enough guys, okay? We want more men on indie poetry, please. We're getting about 9 submissions from, female and to every 1 male. So yeah, I'm not sure why that is, but yeah. So Samuel, this poem, he didn't give it a title. I think of it as the language you need. Okay. You will never hear the language you think you need from anywhere outside. A lion will only tell you in hunts. A placemat will only tell you in crumb and splatter. A ghost will only tell you in death. A check will only tell you in debt. Ask me what I think and I'll speak in mine. A rock will only tell you in time. Not the contour of the antelope, the crust or the broth. Not the buffed headstone, nor the fee. Only my own, only me. Ask your question in, not out. To the core, not up to the cliffs and sky. Unless, of course, what you need is a lie.
Lovely. I loved all the really specific images in that one. That was really nice.
Very particular, very also slightly unexpected. Everything is giving you that little jolt of surprise as you go along. And I was really, as I was reading it, I was asking myself for the first time, where is this going? Where is this going to land? And yeah, I thought it was really quite interesting what he did with that. So we now have our winner. Our winner this month is Emma Bloss, and you'll find, I should have said Samuel, by the way, is on Instagram at Mr. Crosby. So M-R as in Mr. Crosbay. So he must be Samuel Crosby. I don't know, but that's his handle. And yeah, he's got lots of interesting poetry there, and he's also a wildlife campaigner. So a lot of the poems have animal imagery and are used like that in quite an interesting way. So our final take is, unless, do you have another poem, or do you have anybody? I know you only prepared one because I only asked you to prepare one.
Yes. Probably couldn't. I can find something after you read the winner if you'd like, but yeah. I'd rather pay attention.
Okay,
maybe I'll just pay attention, because if I go looking, then I'll miss the poem. So
perfect. Okay, that's great. It would have been nice rhythm, so we'll remember that for next time. Okay. Sure. Emma Bloss, and Emma is at Emma. I pronounce it Bloss because BLAS actually, and I don't know if Emma knows this, is an Irish word for sort of taste and flavour. So the bloss on a poem is often given to, I like the bloss, the lyricism or the particular flavour of the word. So I have no idea if Emma knows that, and that's why she chose Bloss, or whether Bloss is her real name. But anyway, you will find her on Instagram at Emma Bloss Poetry, all one word. BLAS is how you spell. So she may pronounce it Blass or Blaze or whatever, I don't know. But I like to think of it as Bloss. And her poem is called Only What's Next. If I look to the skyline for the center of my horizon, I can try to trace myself, follow along the blue-edged backbone of the mountain, ranged yet singular. I find reassurance in the sure-footed density of being, the earth's deep core, whilst being also in conversation with clouds, comforted by how the cumuli protect me from pitching forward into then. Keep me from the obligation of journeying to the summit. Stretch me wide, full of wonder, at the great adventure in taking only the next step. So thank you, Emma. We will see you on Instagram with that poem. And yes, if you guys would like to submit some poetry, just follow the hashtag indie poetry, please, on Instagram. We try each month pick a few poems that kind of are circulating around the same theme, but that theme is wide open. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. It's really down to you. And if you want more details on how to submit and what it's all about, and you will find those at ornaross.com/submit. So yeah, any final words?
I think this just went really well, and it was a great conversation as always. And it was a huge pleasure to hear the poems being read. That was a nice distraction into my busy work day. So that was very, very much welcomed, and looking forward to next month.
Fantastic. And thank you, Trish, for your poem. Beautiful, amazing poem. Very strong, very interesting, as always, as all your work is. Tell people where they can find you.
TrishHopkinson.com, or if you don't remember that or how to spell it, selfishpoet.com will also get you there.
Fantastic. And we'll be back next month on the advice. We'll be talking about all those ancillary ways to kind of get some income from your poetry, and with more indie poems from Indie Poetry Please. Until then, have a great month, and thank you for being here. Bye-bye.